Hey, Laura, welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm glad we got all set up here and we're squared away to talk about law school admissions and careers. I noticed when coming across your bio that you had worked in Georgetown, specifically focused on career services. Could you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. After attending law school and working in a few large firms, I transitioned into law school administration where I worked in career services in a number of different schools, but mostly at Georgetown in their Office of Career Services, where we helped 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, and recent alumni figure out their career paths and also coordinated employers that were coming to campus and sort of anything that had to do with law school careers.
Wow, so that's a big area. It's been a big topic lately since a lot of the legal field has, of course, undergone a major transition in the past 10, 12 years. And a lot of law schools are kind of being called to account for the low employment rates of their graduates. But I imagine at Georgetown, a lot of law grads did quite well. What were the stats like? Could you share a little on that?
It's interesting because I worked there both before and after the recession. So when I first started, employers were, very excited to have Georgetown students and were, coming to campus all the time. And, it was really the law students market. After the recession, it became a little tougher. So even at Georgetown, you needed to have a good GPA and you needed to have a good resume. And there were still students who would struggle even at Georgetown. And those were mainly the students who either didn't do well in their courses or had very unrealistic goals about what they wanted to do with their law degree, or just, didn't present well, didn't interview well, didn't have a good resume.
So what are some of the unrealistic expectations a law grad might have, even from a top 14? And
Yeah.
what is realistic?
Well, I mean, a lot of students would come in their first year and they would say, I want to do international law. And we would say, well, do you know what that means? What does international law mean to you? And no. And so, I think there were also a lot of idealistic students who wanted to, save the world. And um, it took a lot of time to sort of educate them as 1Ls what the potential paths were. And there are a lot of jobs, they're really like exciting, cool legal jobs, like in-house counsel for a, NFL team. You don't do that right out of college. I mean, out of law school. So sort of educating them on the paths that would take to get there. And then, of course, you had students who just wanted to make a lot of money and go to a big firm right out of school and wanted to go to a top firm in New York City, but were, barely getting a 3.0. And so that's not realistic, even coming from a top T14 school.
Of course not. Of course not. International law. I love that one. It's like there's no such thing. But
There needs to be a word in between international and law, whether it's, human rights, corporate, it's got to be something in between there.
right, not just stuff they do at the UN.
Okay.
But I'm wondering, you talk about, recent law grads or 3Ls, I suppose, looking to enter the employment market. And I would imagine that when you encountered them at Georgetown, there were so many things they could have done differently earlier in their process. And we're lucky enough now talking to pre-law students or 0Ls just entering. What can we tell them now to do correctly over the next?
Go to your career services office your first year. No, that's the number one thing I can say. We really tried to get everybody in because, like you said, there's so many things that they could do differently if they had started from the beginning rather than coming to us 3L year. I think really just exploring their options early on. At Georgetown, we always had this big program called World of Choices, their 1L year, where we would have, a bankruptcy lawyer, a human rights lawyer, a lawyer from a small firm, a lawyer from the government, a lawyer from a big firm, and just all set out at tables one Saturday afternoon so students could walk around and see what kinds of things could I do with a law degree, like what different practice settings and in what different topic areas. So really coming to career services early on, getting your resume in shape, and really, strategically using your 1L and 2L summers. If you want to do the big firm thing, well, then 2L summer is really important because, as I'm sure you know, most firms recruit from that pool. But doing something 1L summer to look good on your resume is important. If you want to go the clerkship route, then I think, doing journal, getting to know professors that can write recommendations, doing an internship with a judge during the year, during the summer. These are all things, you got to sort of be thinking a few steps ahead.
So how early should a 1L start thinking about the summer between 1L and 2L to look for those summer associateships or other opportunities?
So, and now it's been a few years, so I'm going to get the date wrong, but now used to actually have a date before which 1Ls were not allowed to use career services or start applying to jobs. And this was done sort of in their best interest to get them to focus on schoolwork. I think it might be November 1st, but again, it's been a few years. So that being said, I think a lot of it over winter break is when a lot of the sort of job stuff took place, because your 1L year, in the fall, you really should be focusing on your grades. If you spend time sending out resumes instead of studying for your finals, in the long run, that's not a good strategy. So winter break is a good benchmark, I think.
Yeah, that sounds fairly early enough. What are some other common mistakes you might see 1Ls make or even 3Ls make related to careers?
Well, I think not really having a good sense of what they want to do, and then just not taking advantage of all the resources their school offers as far as reaching out to alumni for networking contacts. The legal world is like many other job fields where a lot of it is through connections. And if you're lucky enough to go to a law school where there's a strong alumni network, or if you're lucky enough to be in the city where you want to practice, which is something when I'm working with students who are applying to law school, we talk about, what's your end goal? And so going to a law school that's, maybe a little bit lower ranked, but is in the city where you want to practice could make more sense than going to a higher ranked school. I mean, it's all relative and it depends on the situation, of course, but being actually in the city where you want to practice, where you can make connections and you can do internships during the school year. I mean, that was one thing Georgetown students really had a leg up on, because I would always say, sure, it's really hard to get an internship with a judge in the summer because you've got all the kids from Harvard and Yale and everywhere else are coming down to DC for the summer. But during the spring and the fall, there's not as much competition.
Definitely. That's so true. I love what you said about the city, the area that you want to, the region that you want to practice in. I had an LSAT meetup last night with some students, and someone was saying how they didn't want to go to Fordham because it wasn't a top 14. And I'm saying, well, if you want to stay in New York, USC and UCLA may not be as worthwhile for you as Fordham is, even though they're top 14 or close to it, and Fordham is not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at, I was talking to a student the other day who got into Tulane, but wants to be in New York. I think he was deciding between Tulane and Brooklyn. And so Tulane is a better school, but Brooklyn is in New York. And in his case, I think he's probably still better off at Tulane, but it's going to be more work for him. There are going to be law firms that are happy to have a Tulane student, but they're not flying down to Tulane to interview. It's just not worth their time. Whereas, if he flies up to New York and sends out resume, he'll probably be fine, but it will be a little bit of extra legwork for him.
And I would also imagine that the name recognition does have a power to it. If you're in New York, how many Tulane grads do you see versus how many Brooklyn grads do you see? And just the repetition of the name, I think, has a certain weight to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to do well in law school wherever you are. You need to, be strategic about what you want to do and how you want to get there. If you want to work for the government and if you want to be in public interest and you spend your summers at a law firm, they're not, you're going to be like, oh, but I'm willing to take this huge pay cut and serve the public. And they're going to look at your resume and be like, all you've done is corporate stuff. Like, we don't believe that you're committed to public interest.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, given that you were working at Georgetown in the law school, now you're doing law school admissions privately, I'm wondering how your time at Georgetown has informed your work now.
Well, I think there's, for better or worse, I will often grill students on what they want to do with their law degree. And I'm certainly not talking anyone out of law school, even though someone should have talked me out of law school. But I do really focus on making sure that students, have thought this through and are going to law school for the right reasons, and have some sense of what they want to do when they leave, and using that, to sort of inform where they want to go. A student that I'm working with now, has a full ride to a school that is obviously a little bit lower ranked than other schools that he got into, but he wants to work in the public sector. So graduating with no debt, even from a lower ranked school, probably makes more sense for him, given that he knows he wants to work in the public sector.
100%. So it sounds like you're really able to advise students not only on the initial application process, but then evaluating offers that come back later.
Yeah. So thinking through and negotiating merit money. And, it's interesting. I spent, in addition to my private clients, I spent about 6 months last year working at Georgetown University's undergrad office, working with the pre-law students and recent alumni. So there I got to see a wider spectrum of students that were applying to law school. And so, it was very interesting to see what students were thinking about their career paths. And, the one thing that has changed in recent years, which I'm sure you've seen as well, is that more and more people are taking time off between undergrad and law school, which I personally think is great because it gives them some time to really make sure that this is the right choice and think it through. And also from what I saw when I was at Georgetown Law School, I worked with a lot of the evening students, the part-time program. So a lot of them had taken time or were working at the same time. And employers really value that work experience in between undergrad and law school. Even if it's not directly relevant to what you want to do, just having some, maturity and real world experience, I think is valuable to employers later on.
Yeah. And as an extra bonus, it kind of makes your GPA weigh a little bit less in the admission process, right? But I think I agree that part of our responsibility as people who help people go to law school is helping them make sure it's the right decision for them. Not just saying, yes, everyone should go to law school, because obviously that's not the case. More apparent now than ever.
Yes.
You mentioned one thing you do is you really grill students on why they want to go to law school. And I'm wondering how that plays into crafting the personal statement in particular. I come across so many students who are saying, what should I write about naturally? Why I should go to law school, but then it ends up being a list of everything they've ever done, leading up to the big culminating pinnacle of therefore law school.
Yeah.
So how do you help people break it down a bit?
Yeah, I really try to talk it through with them and figure out, what makes them unique. Like, everybody can say, oh, well, I like to argue. And what do they want to do with their law degree, and what experiences have they had that have made them really interested in the law, and not a list of everything. That's what the resume is for. More, picking one or two related things that really, can show how they developed this interest in the law. And it is a lot more straightforward than the undergrad personal statement or a college essay, because, law schools really do want to know why you want to go to law school, because one big difference between undergrad and law school applications is that not everybody has to go to law school. Like, you don't need to have safety schools. You could just not go, and plenty of people apply and then decide not to go. So they really want to believe that be convinced that you genuinely are going to enroll in law school.
Yeah, 100%. I'm wondering, when students are evaluating or applicants are evaluating law schools, when those offers are coming in, what should they be looking for in terms of things from the law school? It's not just the applicant applies. They also have to, the law schools are applying to the students as well. So it's has to be a match on both ends. And so in particular, when it comes to particular programs the law school might offer or career services they might offer, obviously there's a wide range in quality and depth between different law schools. How might applicants be in a better position to evaluate what services they're ultimately going to get?
Yeah, I think that, again, depends on their goals. So if it's an applicant who is set on going the big firm route, then he or she should get a list from career services of which big firms come to recruit on campus and where where students went the past few years. And also, one big distinction between interviews at higher ranked schools and lower ranked schools is whether they're blind or lottery. So at Georgetown, this has changed somewhat since I left, and that has something to do with the recession. It used to be that employers would just say, law firms would say, we'll do 20 interviews. And then it was a lottery system. So there was no pre-screening. So someone with, that's where I would counsel someone and say, well, you have a 2.5 GPA. You're wasting your interview slot to interview with these people. But in a sense, it was great because a Georgetown student could get in front of an employer, whereas they might not have if there was pre-screening with the resumes. So that's a huge advantage at some of the more selective law schools. But just in general, seeing who recruits and where they're going. If it's a student who's really interested in public sector law, looking at, many schools have separate offices. Georgetown did have the Office of Public Interest and Community Service, which was an entirely separate office with people completely devoted to students who wanted to work in the public sector. Looking at the loan repayment programs, it's called LRAP, and some different schools have different policies where if you work in the public sector, you will have some of your, you have to work for a certain amount of years, and there's all kinds of different, and that's what you should be looking at to evaluate, like what the school you're looking at's policy is, whether you can get some of your loans repaid if you're going to be working in the public sector. And beyond that, clinics, journals, there's things that differ between the law schools. Size, I think, Georgetown's huge, Penn is small. So some people would rather be in a different type of environment.
I really like what you said about asking the schools for a list of who recruits there, or where people end up, what kind of jobs people get. Because I think too often applicants feel like they're the ones who have to apply, and that they're kind of in this inferior position relative to the law schools, given that the law school is a big bureaucracy and august institution and such. But what I'm gathering from you is that it would be appropriate to ask those sorts of questions. It's not going to cast the applicant in a negative light to do this sort of due diligence.
No, I mean, we would get requests like this. I mean, I wouldn't say all the time, but we definitely got requests like this in the career services office directly. So not even going through admissions. And I would say, I wouldn't even usually tell admissions about it unless I would, if the applicant was obnoxious, if the applicant's parents called, there are some situations where I may have given like a heads up to admissions that someone was being annoying, but otherwise, no, it's totally separate. And, once they're admitted, that's when they have the most leverage, obviously. They can come visit. We would have people stop into the office. People would come to visit campus, and they would stop in career services and ask us questions. And, if a school doesn't want to give you that information, well, then, that's saying something.
Definitely. Yeah, that could definitely raise a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been enormously useful, Laura. I appreciate your shedding some light, especially on the career side of things and evaluating schools and such, because I think that's something that doesn't get quite enough attention, but it's incredibly important.
I think
now, if folks are looking to work with you or to reach out to you for help, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
They can just go to my website. It's VinikEPS.com, VinikEPS.com, Vinik Educational Placement Services, and shoot me an email.
Excellent. You're helping them with all stages of the application process, beginning to end, personal statement and such?
Yep. Figuring out where to apply, personal statement, letters of recommendation, addendum, all kinds of stuff.
Great. Well, I would definitely encourage everyone to check it out. Well, one more thing. Yeah. Excuse me.
Everything but the LSAT.
Everything but the LSAT. Yeah. Well, for everything else, I would definitely encourage folks to reach out to you, VinikEPS.com. I'll include it in a link in a description for this episode. Laura, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.